Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm John Delano. Our next guest has served in Congress for the last 8.5 years, coming in during the Tea Party wave. And for 8 years, he was part of a Republican majority and in a fairly safe seat in northwestern Pennsylvania. But then came redistricting, a redrawing of the map for congressional seats. Suddenly, he found himself in something of a swing district. And for the first time, he is not part of the majority of the House. So what has been the transition been like? And how does he see the Democrats who control the chamber? Congressman Mike Kelly represents a big stretch of area in the People's House from southern Butler County all the way up to Lake Erie. And it's so good to have you on the show, Mike.
Thank
Welcome
you.
back.
Thanks, John. Always good to be with you.
You know, you're a Republican.
Yes.
And I think you had a chance to hear Congressman
Yes,
Mike Doyle
I did.
and talk about all the things that the House of Representatives has passed under the Democrats. I will say that the House of Representatives under the Republicans with Speaker Paul Ryan also passed a lot of stuff. And it ends up, it doesn't matter who's in control of the Senate.
That's correct.
The Senate seems to be a real blocking point for work that comes out of the House. Is that true? Is
You
that
know
how
what?
you see
It is. And when I first got elected, and I hadn't heard this term before, but one of the things they said, well, for us, the Republicans, they say, you know, the Democrats are our opposition. The Senate is our enemy. And when you hear that, I thought, what are they talking about? Well, at that time, Harry Reid was in charge in the Senate. Now we have Mitch McConnell. And I think for most of us, those of us in the House, we really work hard to get legislation put together and get it over to the Senate. Then it lays on a table, and Senate leadership determines what's going to come up. And I think that's where we talk about them being the enemy. And I don't think they're their enemy, but it's a different process. And I think the more you're around it, the more you understand it. What an incredible model the founders put together.
Well, it's certainly a difficult model.
Oh,
the House of Representatives has passed 340 bills. Now, a number of them are congressional resolutions naming post office here and a road there. But there's some very substantive bills in that 340 that the Senate has not yet acted on. And as I say, and as you point out, it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican Senate or a Democratic Senate, things that come out of the House just seem to die there. How's it been for you as somebody who was in the House majority and now is in the minority? Has it made a difference in what you do for the folks in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think so. No, the first 6 years I was in, of course, we had Democrats leading in the Senate. Then once the president came into the White House, and we had our majority in the Senate. So I've seen a dramatic change in that. And now it's gone to where the House is now in Democrat leadership. But what I've seen is the fact that we've had some incredible legislation passed. You know, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a huge piece. Taxpayer First Act, huge piece. The Secure Act, that's a huge piece. So there's some things that really have gone well, and then there's other things that get more coverage, or maybe better headlines, but not as substantive as it is for the people that we actually represent. So I've seen some really good things happen on both sides of it.
Right. So let me ask you about the same issue that we started with Congressman Doyle on, and that is the whole issue of gun violence.
Oh, yeah.
Governor Wolf really laid out a big platform for Pennsylvania, things happening at the state level. And in part, what the governor said was, we have to act in Pennsylvania because you can't count on the Congress for anything. I mean, there's just this sense of immobilization, that is, nothing is coming out. Is it your expectation that anything will happen this fall when you go back, either in the House or Senate or with the president, that might help to reduce gun violence in America?
You know what? I wish there was a piece of legislation that would outlaw evil or deal with some mental health issues that we have. You know, when Representative Murphy was in office, Tim Murphy, he was working really hard on the mental health end of it, saying, listen, we have to find a way to actually help people, get them institutionalized, rather than just prescribing and telling them, just self-medicate, you'll be okay. Almost every one of these issues involves something that we already have hundreds of laws on the books now, and yet it still comes down to, well, if they would just pass one more law that would take care of it, I wish that we could do that.
So you oppose universal background checks?
I'm not saying I oppose universal background checks, but what I'm opposed to is making it a political issue and not a strong policy issue. Too much of this stuff is about, well, we have to make a political issue out of this. Listen, if we could do something, they just say a universal background check would take care of it, then would it have taken care of any of the horrific things that happened previously? And the answer is no.
Yeah, and that's a fair comment, because I've heard others say the same thing, that even with universal background checks, you might still have the carnage that we see. Yeah. But that's not an argument against it necessarily. It just says that it may not be efficacious in a variety of situations. Yeah. So let me just ask you point blank: would you vote? Would you support a bill? Have you supported a bill that would close the gun show loophole, and which does not require background checks, and also the private sale loophole with respect to background checks?
Well, I think when we start talking about this issue, we also forget the fact we have something very important to all of us. It's called the Second Amendment in our Bill of Rights. The conversation then becomes much more complicated as private individuals engage with you on what they think should happen. So again, I'm going to back to what I said initially. If you can tell me one piece of legislation that would have changed anything that happened previously when we've had all this carnage, I would love to see that piece of legislation. I could vote for something but to say broadly, I'll vote for anything that makes some kind of progress that way without knowing all that's in that bill. That's a hard thing to say, yes, I will. So, that's a hypothesis.
All right, so I take it that's a no.
No, the answer is if we have something that I can look at that's actually up and we can look at it and discuss it, then I'd be interested in looking at it. It would be a yes if it does pass all of the different things that people are concerned about. And that Second Amendment is so critical to us.
What about an assault weapons ban? Congressman Doyle said
and I understand that. I understand that. If that was something that made sense and would have kept all this carnage from happening, I would say that's something we need to look at.
But does it make sense to you?
Right now it doesn't make sense, because we're saying law-abiding citizens now are going to be told you're not going to be able to choose what you want to buy because somebody else has determined that that's not right for you.
So you don't have a problem with folks having assault weapons in their homes?
No, listen, this is the Second Amendment. We have 1.4 million Americans that have died in military to protect that Constitution. And for me to sit here and say, you know what, these are things that I think I wasn't there when they first came up with the Bill of Rights, but I've determined right now it's no longer effective and we need to change it.
I mean, the argument that you hear is assault weapons were not around when the Second Amendment, the founders wrote that, so they did not.
But the basic principle was there about why we wanted citizens to be able to defend themselves.
And you would apply it to assault weapons and to the clips that allow rapid-fire bullets to be fired. You would say that's covered by the Second Amendment?
Well, I would say presently, yes, it is. Unless somebody can show me somewhere there where it's not, I'd love to see it.
Let's move on to some other issues. What do you think are some of the most important issues that Congress, the House, either has addressed or should address and hasn't?
We know this session, I sit on the House subcommittee, the Ways and Means subcommittee.
Right, the tax folks.
The tax folks, one of the things we do. But I'm on the oversight subcommittee with an iconic member of Congress, a guy named John Lewis, who's our chairman, and I'm the ranking member there. So I do things with John Lewis almost every week on oversight of what's going on in our government. And one thing we really want to pay attention to is the role of the IRS. While it's an enforcement agency, we've been able, through the Taxpayer First Act, to make it a customer service entity. I met with Commissioner Reddick from the IRS and talked to him. Tell me what we can do to make it easier on hardworking American taxpayers to make sure that they feel, first of all, that they're being treated fairly all the time and somehow they're not intimidated anytime they get a letter from the IRS. And one thing we can put out right now, I want all our listeners, if you get a call from the IRS that says you are under investigation or you owe money, hang up that phone right now. The IRS will not call you. You'll get a letter. Yeah. And I hear from people all the time. I've had 3 calls myself, and I'll say, you know what, I'm busy right now. Give me your number. I'll call you back. And next thing you hear is a click. So we've got to combat that. But again,
do you think the IRS is more taxpayer friendly now than it has been?
I do think it's more taxpayer friendly right now. So we have to have a collection agency. We know that. I think the one thing that we sometimes lose sight of is every single penny that this government uses, and it's our government, is provided by hardworking American taxpayers. And I think when we lose sight of the fact of who's picking up the tab, who's actually paying it, then we've lost sight of what our real role is. So listen, we've done a lot of good things. I talked about Taxpayer First Act, Secure Act, where we want to make sure that Americans are going to have in the future more money in their retirement. You do that through tax policy so that they can set more money aside, pre-tax dollars aside, to get ready for their retirement, for their golden years with a little more gold in their pocket.
What has disappointed you most about the Democratic-controlled House?
You know what? Mike and I get along really well. I think one of the things that
Yeah,
I
I
would
get,
look at.
and maybe I don't mean to.
Yeah,
get
no,
off track,
it's
but
not about Mike
Pennsylvania
Kelly.
delegation,
Yeah,
I think,
the Pennsylvania
seems to
delegation
work
is
well
pretty
on
much
Pennsylvania
yeah,
issues.
yeah, we really do. We get along very well. I think one of the things that I look at right now. So we've gone through the Russia collusion. We're going through racism right now, and we're going through a recession right now. And what we're turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to is really solid policy that helps every single American. And I think that this idea that we continue after 3 years to try and find a way to impeach the President of the United States, why are we doing that now? And if it's become such a thing as it's all about the politics and no longer about the policy, then we are failing the people who elected us and sent us there. And more importantly, the people who didn't vote for us, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm representing their best interests as well.
You don't think there's any basis at all for impeaching President Trump?
What are they going to try next? Seriously, they are wasting so much money. We're over $40 million in the background of the Russia collusion. And we say, well, that's okay, it was needed to be done. But there's still something in this guy's background. I have never seen a president, a first lady, or a first family attacked on a daily basis the way this president is, his family and the first lady. I think it's horrific. It sends a bad message, and I would just say, Mike and I talked about this, in the future, who's going to run for these offices?
Yeah.
Why would any private individual put himself or herself up there for the type of scrutiny that says, well, you know what? We checked into it 30 years ago, you did something we don't agree with, and we need to go after you on that. So anyways, look, I would like to see us keep working on policy. We got a really strong economy right now, with the strongest in the world. Stop talking about a recession. I've never seen Americans, some Americans rooting for America to have a bad economy because it would affect the next election, as opposed to let's hope for a good economy that rises all boats.
Well, Congressman Mike Kelly, it's good to have you on
John,
the show.
thank you
You so much for being here and being
Always
part
a
of this.
pleasure.
I know we're going to have you back again.
Thank you.
Good luck to
Appreciate
you.
it.
We'll be back in a moment when the KDPG Sunday edition continues.